And so when you look at, what the statistics say about students who come from, lower economic situations or, impoverished situations or, just very challenging family situations, you know, the data wants to say that they're going to have a difficult time. Their chances of doing well are very slim. But we are reversing that narrative and showing that it doesn't matter where you come from, where you live, what your zip code is, what your family background is, what your ethnicity is. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, if you have the resources and the tools and the support and the right direction, you can be successful regardless of those things.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators, part of the Ripple Maker Project. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to be here. It's rare that you spend time interviewing someone and by the end of the hour, you're like, I'd like to turn over my physical health, my mental health, my spiritual health, to this person who's like just such a beacon and such a grounded testament to what it looks like to be in like deep relationship with your inner world and with your responsibility to the outer world. I loved talking to Robert. It was wonderful.
I loved listening to it. And now you see why when we heard him on that panel at the D Magazine event, we wanted to invite him on.
Good move. Good move.
Hey,
Tell
thanks.
the listeners what he's up to and who he is before they hear from him.
Okay, what I want to read is how he starts his bio, because no one starts their bio this way. Robert Selders Jr., and don't call him Bob, by the way. Robert is a husband, father, coach, and community leader who stays rooted in one mission, helping young people and those who serve them thrive. I just love that. I love how he started that. He's an engineer turned fitness entrepreneur, and he currently serves as the school board president for Garland ISD, which is one of the largest public school districts in North Texas. And we learned in the interview that he's served on the board for 10 years, which says a lot in itself. He has a book, Outperform 50, and he coaches men over 50 to get leaner, stronger, and more confident physically and mentally. And he's a firm believer that relationships are the real engine of transformation in our schools and communities. And he talks about that in the interview. And I have a feeling we'll touch on that in our debrief.
I don't think I clicked in to that his training is zeroed in on men over 50. But just kind of like scanning our culture right now and the different versions of masculinity and how much of it is just like train off the tracks, terrifying. I love that. I love his version of masculinity, and I love that he is in relationship with other men and they get to see what it looks like. Anyway, that's like probably a whole different podcast, but I hadn't clicked into that until you just now said it.
Well, and I think that's why it stood out to me that he started his bio with those descriptors, right? Husband, father, coach. Like, that's different. And I love that.
Awesome.
So shall
well,
we meet him?
Yes,
okay.
Let's do it. Well, welcome, Robert. Good to see you.
Good seeing you as well, Michelle.
I'm so excited to get to have this conversation because Katie and Chris both got to know you from an event and hearing you speak, and they could not stop talking about how impactful and contagious you were. So I'm excited to have a minute to chat.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. A little nervous because I was like, I got the big fancy mic and the headphones. Like, this is official now.
Katie makes us all feel like shined up for sure.
I love it.
Well, let's start by just hearing about your story and how you came to be so invested in educators and students thriving?
To get to where I am today, it was sort of like a windy type process. I've always valued education. In fact, my parents were always sharing with us the importance of education and how it could give you so many more options, right? And so I went to high school, played sports, went to college, played sports as well, and majored in electrical engineering, and I was playing football at the time. And then I had two serious injuries. I tore my ACL my very first year, and then the next year came back, rehabbed, and tore my other ACL the second year.
my
So I took that as a
gosh.
hint and a half that God was trying to tell me to do something different. And so luckily, I was blessed to have had an opportunity to play multiple sports in high school. And so I just walked on to the baseball team. So I had a full football scholarship, and then I walked onto the baseball team. I was able to earn a scholarship, and so that's how I paid for school. And so when I graduated, I'm feeling like I'm going off on a tangent already, but when I
No, no.
graduated, started working, I went to grad school, and then after grad school, getting married and starting working. And one of the things that I recognized that when I was in college and in high school, there was this component of having intellectual challenge as well as physical challenge. And that was really what drove me. Just being intellectually engaged all day, every day as an engineer, it was like, and not being active, it just kind of led down this really crazy path and gaining a whole lot of weight and all this kind of stuff. And so one thing led to another, and then transitioned out of engineering in 2019. There's a whole story there, and we can get into it today or at some other point. Transitioned from there, and I started a fitness company. Started consulting initially, having had my own sort of personal physical transformation. And then once starting that company, it led me to sort of find out more about the city of Garland. So I went through a leadership program in Garland called Leadership Garland, and it exposed us to the school district. And so one of the things that happened as part of that program is there was Education Day, where they took the whole cohort to an elementary school, a middle school, and then a high school. And then we attended a board meeting later that afternoon and evening. And so part of the board meeting involved dinner with the trustees. And so I didn't get a chance to meet all of the trustees at that moment or at that time. We had one that was sitting at our table, and we had a chance to sort of pepper them with questions. And we were asking all these different questions based on the things that we had seen earlier that day. And I was impressed. I mean, I didn't know very much about the school district at the time, other than I had a business in Garland, and knowing the importance of workforce development and all those types of things. And so later on, we actually sit into the board meeting, and I'm sitting there, and it just talked about all of the demographics that day. And so I'm looking at the dais, and I'm noticing just the makeup of the board, and I'm thinking about the demographics that they shared with us for the district. And I was like, that just seems a little off to me. And so I
Yeah.
just remember thinking, maybe at some point in time, I would like to do something like that. And I just sort of kind of tucked it away in my back pocket and went on about life. And so one of the things that I was able to get involved with within Garland ISD was the Student Health Advisory Council. And just having a fitness background and being able to understand about health initiatives and things like that, had an opportunity to sit in that committee or that council and participate. And then I eventually sort of became parent co-chair. And so we were making recommendations to the board about things that were health related as it, concerned the students in the district. And so it just gave me a different perspective of what actually happens within a school district, particularly around health. And so fast forward, one of the trustees decided not to run for re-election. And I was like, well, okay, I'll throw my name in the hat. And eventually, had to run a campaign and got elected. That first election was kind of crazy. I was running against a guy who had run 2 times previously. And so I was a little nervous because I'm like, I haven't been out there. Like, nobody really knows who I am. And so I had some people in my gym that were familiar with the process to some degree, and they helped me. And I actually won that election and won by 59 votes. And so
Wow.
when that happened and the results came in, it was sort of one of these really surreal moments because, you always hear every vote counts. And that was very, clear to me that day how important it is for everybody to vote and to make their voice heard, regardless of where you stand. It's important to exercise that your vote. And so that's sort of how I got into the board process, and it's sort of been blow and go from there.
And now you serve as president, right?
So I got elected to the Garland ISD Board of Trustees in May of 2015, and this is my 10th year, and I am board president. Got elected board president. Yes.
And not just any 10 years, the last 10 years, which
Yes.
is no joke for leadership.
It's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't change it. No, it's been wild.
The decision to step into a gap that you noticed instead of just be like, oh, hey, there's a representation issue here. Mm-hmm. Like the demographics of the kids do not match who's making the heaviest hitting decisions. A lot of us see that and hope something will change, but you saw it and you were like, I want to do something. And then you figured out a path to get to that seat, not in a strategic way, but like in a I'm open way,
Right.
And found a place to serve and learn that then led to this other. I just think there's so much takeaway there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think a lot of times, it's easy to sit around and complain and, talk about all of the different things that aren't happening or should be happening or you wish could be happening. And it's something altogether different to kind of raise your hand and say, okay, I'll take it on, or I'll at least try.
Yeah.
You don't always get it right. And I don't profess to know everything, and I don't profess to do everything correctly. And I don't think anybody is perfect. And so, but the effort and the intention, I think, are there to make it better for more than not, right? Because I think what I saw, even before getting on the board, was that different students were having a different experience, and I think that happens in many environments. It's not just in education. It can happen in a corporate environment. It can happen, in any environment where people are just having different experiences. And so, and I'm not saying it's different from a place of good or bad. It's just different. And so the question I ask myself is this going to allow them to be successful when they exit our system? And if we're not answering that question with an affirmative yes, and with evidence to demonstrate that we're doing that, then we need to be changing some things up.
I am not sitting at any tables right now where the people that are with me aren't going, I want to do something. I want to figure out how to plug in around things I care about. And also a little bit of fugue around what is it that even moves the needle? How do I plug in? And your story to me is like fuel to everyone listening of like, just do something, like trust yourself, follow your interests, follow the need, and do it. And look what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many students in Garland ISD?
So we have approximately 53,000 students. And what's interesting and different about Garland than I've noticed about some other districts is we have about 75% of our students are economically disadvantaged. And so when you look at, what the statistics say about students who come from, lower economic situations or, impoverished situations or, just very challenging family situations, the data wants to say that they're going to have a difficult time and their chances of doing well are very slim. But we want and are reversing that narrative and showing that it doesn't matter where you come from, where you live, what your zip code is, what your family background is, what your ethnicity is. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, if you have the resources and the tools and the support and the right direction, you can be successful regardless of those things.
In fact, my experience is that people who come from a more challenging start, but are given access and opportunity and resources, they turn out to be our most textured, interesting leaders because their prism is different. They just have a wider view on what's needed, what the cost is of inaction and all of that. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that there's some validity to that. I think that that's not the only thing. I think you can have people that derive leadership skills and capability from different facets, regardless of what their background is. But I think what happens is when you are willing to hear and listen to all voices, it gives you a much broader perspective, because most people don't live in black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray. And so if you are a leader and you're only fixated with one viewpoint and you don't have the perspective that can accommodate other viewpoints, then it's going to be very difficult to lead people who need that. And so because I always look at everybody as a culture of one, right? You know, people talk about culture and they talk about diversity. Like every person is an individual culture, because there'll never be another Michelle, right? There'll never be another Robert. And so how you show up or how we show up in the spaces that we occupy, it matters. And so when you have a leader that can see the individuals for who they are and what they bring to the table, irrespective of what their background is or what as a leader, what their background is, and you're able to hear all voices, I think it just opens you up to very many much more possibilities, and being able to find solutions that work for the masses as opposed to just only a specific few.
I mean, just that, what you just shared, I'm like, of course you've been there 10 years and of course you were elected to lead the board. I mean, that generosity of spirit and that understanding of the value of all the voices and the ways to meet people where they are without compromising your values, like that's seemingly a lost art form in some settings.
What makes you say that, just out of curiosity?
I just feel like so many people are trapped in like a survival state right now, like a fear state, which is almost reflexively creating that othering.
Yes.
And it takes real intentionality and real heart to like open yourself up to not thinking about someone one-dimensionally and not thinking that there's a way to work together.
Right. You know, I remember hearing this described, you know, when somebody wanted to expand on fear, and they said that fear is just false evidence appearing real. And so when you operate in that space, it does sort of confine you, and it restricts you, and it prevents you from really being open to other possibilities. And so when you don't allow yourself to be human and don't acknowledge other people's humanity, then there becomes this sort of like conflict, I think. And so I tend to think in terms of what I want this for myself. Okay, are the decisions that I'm making, are these decisions that I would make for me? And so one of the things that I shared at the panel, you know, I was having a conversation with some trustees once, and we were talking about literacy. And I had attended several presentations, and, you know, one of the presentations talked about this school to prison pipeline, and, you know, how if students aren't reading on grade level by the third grade, then they're going to struggle. And as I got into, you know, school district work and work as a trustee, I started kind of noticing several trends. And so one of the things that, you know, I understood and was sort of shared to me was that from pre-K or kindergarten to third grade, students are learning to read. And then from fourth grade on, you're reading to learn. So just imagine if you can't read and you hit the fourth grade, you're going to struggle. And the research and the data is clear about that. And so we were talking about early literacy, and that's one of the goals that we have as a board, to make sure that, you know, we have our students reading on grade level by the time they exit the third grade. So I'm having this conversation, and we were talking about what our goals were. And one of the people indicated, man, like it's tough to get high literacy, you know, results in the third grade. I'm like, okay, so what would you suggest would be good? Like, what would you think would be an excellent, you know, literacy rate? It was like 70%. And I'm like, really? 70%? I said, so help me understand this. what would you do, or would you be okay if your child was one of the 30% of students not reading on grade level?
Mm.
And they said no. I said, so let's talk about your board. Do you think anybody on your board would be okay with their child being one of the 30% of children not able to read on grade level as they're exiting the third grade? And the answer was no. I said, well, let's take it one step further. As a leader, right, let's get into an auditorium and put all your third grade students in that auditorium. Would you be comfortable selecting the 30% that you don't want to be reading on grade level when they exit the third grade? And they said no. I said, so help me understand this. If you wouldn't want it for you, and you know your trustees wouldn't want it for their kids, why would you be okay with someone else's kids or kid not being able to read? And it was like super quiet. And I wasn't trying to be a butthole. I wasn't trying to be nasty or mean. I was just trying to prove a point. Like, if you don't want it for you, why would you accept it for somebody else? Why
Right.
wouldn't we set that goal at 100%? Now, I understand that there's some other things that kind of go into it, and that is definitely an aspirational goal. And so if you get closer to 100%, that means that there are fewer students that you have left to remediate. And if your system supports, are there to make sure that kids get close to that mark, then there's less for the fourth grade teachers to have to do in terms of teaching reading. They can also now focus on teaching content, and students are able to learn. And so I think about those types of things when we're making decisions and we're having conversations, because it always goes back to that for me with individuals. Like, would you want that for you? Or
Right.
would you want that for people that you love?
Yeah, it's such a good filter. You can put that filter on how kids are either disciplined or given opportunities for, restoration from
Yes.
whatever bad behavior. Or,
Yes.
yeah, I think that's such a concrete way to get at what you were talking about earlier, the connecting to your own humanity and holding yourself accountable for seeing the humanity in every single student, every single adult in the building, every single community member.
And I think it allows you to dissipate fear, right? Because you would be more incentivized, right? If you knew it was something that you had the control to change or you could give voice to, and it keeps you sort of out of this space of, wanting to withhold or to hold back. Say, let's open it up. Let's give everybody the opportunity to experience this and be exposed to it. And another thing too that happens sometimes is you don't know what you don't know. And so if you've never been exposed, how can you have the expectation of individuals that they should know, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't see how that could be reasonable for anybody to assume.
That all makes so much sense to me, and it feels so invitational instead of like crushing. It's
Right.
like putting our focus on the preferred future, the vision, the what we desire to create versus getting consumed with the problem.
Right. And that's easy to do. I mean, I think there's enough problems that are happening, and everybody has challenges that they're dealing with. What I found for me is being of service and looking at ways that I can serve other individuals helps me to kind of get that out. And not necessarily from an avoidance standpoint, because there will always be challenges there, but I think it gives me the fuel and the energy to be able to go back and now look at it from a fresh perspective and with renewed energy to be able to tackle, whatever you have to deal with.
It makes it closer to a fair fight. Like the issues that you're dealing with as a school board president, that all the educators that are listening to this are dealing with, they're complex to the degree that many of them are unlikely to be solved in our lifetime. And if we're coming at it from that outcome focus, it's a little bit more of a fair fight because creativity, innovation, all those things come online, versus when we're absorbed and consumed by the problem, we're paralyzed by anxiety and we think and act small.
Yeah. Well, think about what you just talked about in terms of not being a fair fight and things not being solved in our lifetime. I think a lot of problems can be solved if you get the right people in the room who have a broad enough perspective, and who have different experiences that can contribute to solutions that would be beneficial for the masses. Now, again, I understand that you can't solve the problems for everything, but if you get close enough, then the other ones you're just, having to deal with outside of that, it's going to require fewer resources. And so when I think about, particularly with public education, and how, just from a funding, let's just look at it from a funding standpoint. We had a situation in Garland ISD where we had two campuses that were historically underperforming. And so we brought in an ACE program ACE program model for those campuses. ACE, I think, stands for Accelerated Campuses of Excellence. And we provided, new leadership. We hired the best teachers that had demonstrated evidence of being able to grow students that, had difficulty. We extended the school day, brought in tons of resources before school, after school. So the way I looked at it is that we gave those students what they needed to be successful, right? We provided the resources, the tools, and the support to make that happen. And in less than a year and a half, they completely transformed, right? So they go from being a DF campus to maybe a BA potentially, right? And what changed? The students didn't change. It was the adults, right? And so I think I quoted this guy, AJ Crable, when we were at the panel. And it's been
I know
something.
AJ.
You know AJ? He's a great guy.
He is a great guy.
And one of the things that he says all the time, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but the way I look at it is like student outcomes will change when adult behaviors change. And what I've observed more now than ever is that it's not the students that are the real issues, it's the adults, right? So if we can get the adults to do the things that are in the best interest for the students, then we might be able to make some, progress. And that's across, the board, right? And at all levels, right? And so, again, not from a space of good or bad, but asking the question, is this right for kids? And so when I tend to look at things or hear things or am asked to, decide or make decisions, that's one of the things from an educational standpoint that I like to think about, how is this best for kids? And are adults serving themselves? Are they actually serving our kids?
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackyBox. TackyBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self-monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self-reflection, students build self-awareness, self-regulation, and meaningful connections. TackyBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well-being. Go to tackybox.com to learn more and become a TackyBox district.
I would love to hear your thoughts about the conditions under which adults thrive. That sort of parallel process of like systems sometimes oppress the adults in the building that then they fail the kids in the building or don't deliver at the level that we wish they would. What are your thoughts about the conditions under which adults can show up and do their most creative work?
I think that that's a really complex, answer or question to answer, because everybody's so different, right?
Yeah.
What everybody needs in order to
Culture
feel like
of one.
Exactly, right? So I think more than anything, the first place that I think it's important to start is the relationship, right? So if I think about it from the standpoint of just a campus, what the campus principal has to be able to do in terms of building relationships with each adult that they're responsible for, who interfaces directly with kids. I think that that's huge, right? Because if I can build a relationship and I can get to know Michelle and ask the question, Michelle, what do you need in order for you to do your best work and to show up every day and meet these expectations, right? Because you have to be clear about those expectations. And I think that's part of the relationship too, right? Like as a leader, I would need to know what you expect from me, and you would need to know what I expect from you. Right. And once we have that clarity and it's communicated and we both understand what that looks like, not having any questions about it. Okay, I wonder if Michelle meant that. No, just be clear about it, right? Then I can go about providing you whatever tools and resources that you need, or the environment that you need in order to be, safe, feel valued, have the resources and the support that you need. And it might look different for different people, but as the leader of that campus, that's what you signed up for. Right. And so you're committing to doing that and providing that for the people that directly interface with the students. And so if leaders are able to, in this instance, hear what the teacher needs, know what their expectations are and are clear about that, and are able to provide the resources, the tools, and the support to help them, I think that they would be able to, at least at a first order, to be able to deliver, quality tier 1 instruction to their class. Now, there's going to be some other things that pop up here and there. But if you have the relationship and you feel like there's open lines of communication, and that you're not going to be judged in any negative way if you go back to the leader and say, hey, this isn't working, I need something different, you can have a conversation and be able to carry on from there. I don't know how often that happens.
Yeah.
I'm not in schools every day to know that. And through the hustle and bustle of life, there's a lot that goes on. And so, and I think it's difficult because there's so many different things that teachers and principals are being asked to do. I think about most school districts are going through a serious budget situation now, right? And since before COVID, right, 2019 was the last time that the basic allotment was increased for school districts. So since 2019 until now, some 6 years later, we haven't gotten any additional funding for public schools. But yet, there are mandates that come every single year, and they're kind of layered on, and they're not funded by the state. Like, these are things that school districts have to figure out. And so I, coming into this particular presidency, felt like the question that I needed to answer, or at least ask and try to get answers for, is how do we fortify our school district against those types of changes, right? The state is going to do what the state's going to do. TEA is going to do what TEA does. I ain't mad at them. They're going to do what they do. But I can't control any of that.
Right.
But what is it that I can control to help us fortify our system against those types of things that I'm not going to say that they're intentional, but I'm not going to not say that they're intentional. Like, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it might be a duck. I don't know.
Quack, quack.
But I'm just saying, so it's less about them and more about what do we do. And the answer keeps coming back when I ask different people, is if we can get our students to mastery, that really doesn't matter, because you can change the START test and you can put any kind of test or whatever you want in front of our students. If they are at mastery level, then that is something that I can't really touch. I mean, again, you're going to have some outliers, and that's possible. But again, the lift at that point is not going to be what it is today. In my gym, I used to own a CrossFit gym. And there was this sort of continuum that was used called the continuum of health. And on one end, it was sickness, and the other end was fitness. And in the middle, it was wellness. And so the general idea is that there are very quantifiable or measurable things that you can determine if a person is sick. Like, you can look at body fat, you can look at, triglyceride levels, you can look at cholesterol, you can look at lean mass, you can look at movement. There's so many different things, blood pressure. You can look at those things, and you can take those measurements and quantify and categorize people as well. And you can do the same thing for people that are fit. And so without looking at the individual, you can look at those measures to determine where that person is on this spectrum. And so I started thinking about this when I got the answer, or at least the response, that if we can get our students to mastery, then that would be the ideal. And so I remember drawing this sort of like bell-shaped curve. So on one end of the bell-shaped curve was sickness, and the other end was fitness, and in the middle was wellness. And much like what happens when I owned my gym and people just wanted to pursue wellness, which again, there's nothing wrong with pursuing wellness. And like, I want to walk and I'm going to try to drink more water and I'm, going to try to stay away from fast foods and all of these types of things. Pursuing wellness looked a certain way and it got you to a certain result. But then when life happens, and it will, it's a very slippery slope to sickness. And once you get there, to traverse back to wellness is so much harder. But if you're pursuing fitness, you're going to be on the other side of that curve. And the more you're able to pursue fitness, it's basically creating this buffer that protects you against the ravages of time and disease. So when life happens, if you're pursuing fitness and you're on that other side, you at least have to pass through wellness. And so you have that buffer before you slide down that slope. So using that sort of thought process, I was thinking, on the one side, you have students who approach or they did not meet the standard. And on the other end, you have students that are at mastery. And in the middle, students that are meeting the standard. And so again, you can have students that are meeting the standard in one grade year. And then the next year, if that's what you're focused on, if any of those things happen, like they, got a new teacher or went to a different school, in a different area, their parents moved, they had a change in their household, like all of these different things can factor. You still have to, be able to address that. But if those things happen and you're not checking for it, then that student could slide. And I'm not saying that those are the only reasons, but it just kind of gave me a visual that if we're allowing our teachers and providing them with the tools and the resources and the support that they need in order to address those issues so that we can get those students to mastery, then it's still, there's a buffer there, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just one way. It's not the way, but it's like, how do we get to that? How do we get to a place where we're thinking about ways of instructing and educating kids so that they can get to mastery?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think that's so interesting too when two disciplines inform each other. I had a mentor that used to tell me, like, it's at the intersection of different disciplines where the greatest innovation happens. So hearing from you that this comes from your exercise science background, but it totally applies.
Yes.
And it also kind of rings back to your earlier comment of like, we got to aim for 100%, even though we may not get to 100. We can't aim for 70. We can't aim for meets. We got to aim for mastery.
Right.
And then as life happens, to your point, there's a buffer there.
Good. And you do that because what if it was your kid?
Yeah.
Right. Or what if it was you? Right.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. You have to.
And I'm so interested in this reframe from like the very understandable and appropriate sense of victimization, because I do feel like public education is under attack, and it's real easy to be like, this is happening to us. As I hear you talk about it, it's like, yeah, that is happening. Truth is truth. And where our focus is how do we fortify our system in the face of that is out of our control?
Absolutely.
It's a really different way of relating to the stressor, and the relating to is the juice.
Mm-hmm. I look at it from the standpoint, nobody's coming to rescue us. We got to figure some stuff out for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's going to be okay. We can do some hard things. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing it, right? And so we just kind of have to reimagine and refocus and rethink and innovate how we approach schooling in the public schools.
So amazing. And talk to us about this notion of fortifying systems. How should the listeners be thinking about fortifying themselves given the enormous challenges that they're navigating?
Yeah. Self-care is important. Like, you got to take care of yourself, right? And again, what that looks like for everybody is going to be different. But you have to make sure that you are clear about what you need in order to be okay. And one of the things that I try to do is surround myself with people that I know care about me, but they love me enough to tell me the reality of the situation, right? They're not going to sugarcoat anything, right? Don't give me hints. Don't don't try to, get me to see, oh no, maybe no, just tell me straight up, because then I can deal with it, right? Like, and I'm not saying that, you're harsh with it. You're like, you're
Yeah.
telling a person in love, right? Because if I
Yeah.
truly love you and I want what's best for you, I want to give you the information that you need, because if I see something that's off, or, you're going in a different direction than, what you said. Okay, you said, I want to do this. Okay, I'm observing this, and it's not me accusing you or attacking you. I'm just saying, hey, Michelle, you told me that this is what you wanted. Now, this is what I'm observing. Help me understand how those two align, and brings them back into the equation, as opposed to me just delivering them news to you and, kind of pissing you off. And then now you're, upset at me, and now you're off doing your own thing. But I think it's important for people to make sure that they have a really strong support system around them, of people that they know that love and care for them.
Yeah.
But then also being proactive and, making sure that you are resting and getting adequate rest, and making sure that you're properly hydrated, making sure that you're, eating good food, making sure you're moving your body. I told you about my injuries. I tore my ACLs, and one of my orthopedic doctors that I've worked with, would always say, motion is lotion. It's like, you cannot not afford to move. You have to move for the rest of your life. And so, getting those endorphins up, and by, exposing your body to movement, and, at a, with eustress, not stress, but there's a, eustress. And so you have the ability to have this positive stress that actually is positive for you, and actually helps you be able to deal with some of the challenges that you have. When before I got on the school board, one of the things that I observed with the training method within CrossFit, and this is not necessarily just specific to CrossFit, but there are elements of fitness when you are exposing yourself to levels of intensity that you're not normally exposed to. That is a form of very, very challenging and very stressful effort, right? And what I realized is that the body doesn't know the difference between that kind of stress and then the stress that you encounter in various situations. One of the things that, I really try to do is just not be around a whole lot of drama, and I think probably that kind of comes with age. When you reach I had a realization once, not too long ago, actually, that if you look at, statistics in terms of when people might potentially die, I realize and I recognize that I probably have less time to live than I've already lived. And so I'm thinking, I don't have a whole lot of time to mess around. Like like life is too short to be living in unforgiveness. Life is too short to be dealing with drama every day, right?
Yeah.
So, when I think about those things, I try to sort of make sure that I'm aware. But going back to what I was saying about the stress, because your body doesn't know the difference, what I discovered that when I was training that way, when I would encounter situations that in the past might have, caused me a little bit more angst, or, made me flush when I've had to deal with it, my body's like, we've been here before and you didn't die.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay. And so that was sort of that, indication to me that, yes, you need to move. You need to continue to move, and again, take care of yourself and your mindset, and do the things that you need in order to be okay.
And it very much goes back to your bell curve of like aiming for
Fitness.
something beyond this would be good enough,
Yes.
especially if you're in a really stressful profession like educators are.
Absolutely.
It's like, if you're aiming for, I just want to feel good enough, then you're going to always stay in a zone of high risk to slip back into not okay.
Exactly. Because life is going to happen. Things are going to come up, and slip into that not okay. Now you're impacting those you're responsible for educating. And if they're not educated properly, and if they leave your classroom not being able to give them everything that you had to give them because you weren't okay, that, think about, 20 kids in your classroom, they're leaving your class, and they didn't get your best because you weren't able to be in a situation where more days than not you were okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you deserve it independently.
100%.
Like, so critical because of your work in the world, and because you are you deserve to be out of the danger zone when it comes to mental health and wellness and
Absolutely.
fitness. And yeah,
Absolutely.
we need them. We need them in their in the state of a well-being that allows their natural brilliance to flow through, so they can do their work in the world in a time when it's always been critical. But man, the mark of a good teacher, a good counselor, a good administrator in 2025, a good school board leader, like the mark of that, like the ripple effect of that,
Absolutely.
it's just massive right now.
It is. It really is. I always think in terms of, and I don't know what people's sort of spiritual positions are, but I always say that there's a special place in heaven for teachers.
Yeah.
They do tremendous work, work that's beyond important. It's just crazy how impactful and life changing having an amazing educator in your life. And I would say for most adults, if they had a teacher that really changed them for good or not so good, right? That there's different levels of impact. You remember that. You remember that for a long time. In fact, before I got on the board, I actually called my high school English teacher, and she's still teaching to this day.
No way.
Amazing educator. And one of the things that when I talk with her, I hear a lot is not changing the standard, not lowering the expectation. My high school was positioned in an area, my whole hometown, that, people had a lot of negative things to say about the kids that were there and what types of things were going on. And kids are going to be kids. She didn't care who you were, what you were into prior to coming to her class. When you came to her class, you had to meet the standard, and it didn't matter who you were. And she's still that to this day. And, I look at her and I think about the impact that she's had on me personally, to always strive for excellence, right? Perfection for some people can be the goal, but excellence to me is a little bit different, because I understand that I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to get some things, thrown off here and there, because I'm a human being and I'm prone to error. But if I can strive for excellence in everything that I do, then I think I'll be tracking pretty well. And so having teachers that really instill that, you have your parents and your family that do that, but then having that reinforcement when you go to school on a day-to-day basis, a teacher that you are seeing and having an opportunity to see, and you have a teacher that has joy. They show up and they love what they do. I mean, that's infectious, and kids can see that and they can experience that. I also think that kids have a really strong BS meter too, because they know when you're not real.
Yeah.
Right? And I didn't know this until I got onto the board. But you'd hear people say, you have teachers that don't even like kids, and I'm like, okay, I can get that, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but again, if it goes back to I have the relationship with my principal, I understand what my expectations are, and I'm clear about that, and I'm doing my job, right? We've all been in environments where there are people that don't necessarily, cozy to us, or they rub us the wrong way, but you still have a job to do. You're on a team, right? And you have team goals, team objectives to meet. And it's not about liking the individual, it's about getting the job done. And you can celebrate later. But there's a lot of these different things. And again, it depends on the individuals. But at the end of the day, I think that again, going back to teachers having what they need in terms of resources, tools, and support, and then leadership that is, open and supportive and providing clear expectations, then I think that they have a much better chance of being able to step into the work that they do and show up in ways that allow them to do their best work.
What is your English teacher's name?
Her name is Miss Jacqueline Stevens.
Miss Jacqueline Stevens. And where does she teach?
She teaches at Washington Marion High School in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
I love it. And her capacity to have that North Star of don't lower the standards, like the way you talk about it is so eloquent. It's like medicine. It's medicine to not lower the standards. And I did some work with, or some training with David Emerald, who wrote 3 Vital Questions, Transforming Workplace Drama. And he and his partner, Donna, they talk about how if you have an audacious view of what's possible, what you want to see happen, that like ignites in us enthusiasm. And if you water that down, then you are also watering down the engine that moves you toward what you want to see happen. And so it's like, as things get more complex, a lot of systems and a lot of individual people want to water down what they think is possible. And what that's doing is it's disengaging individual engines, collective engines, like that enthusiasm to reach for something. So I love that her North Star is like, don't lower standards, like just hold the bar of what's possible for every single student. So inspiring.
High. Absolutely. Keeping those expectations high. It was impactful for me. And I don't know if you have kids, but even with my kids, and every one of them are different. I have 3 daughters, and each of my daughters are, unique, and they're different and brilliant, funny, beautiful, but keeping that bar high. Here's the expectations. Like, I understand that you might have this XYZ challenge, but this is what the expectation is.
And belief that they'll get it.
Absolutely.
Holding
belief
that.
And supporting them. Right. And again, being able to understand what support looks like for them and what they need. I was talking to somebody recently, and they made the comment that if you lower the bar for kids, they'll go under it every single time. But if you raise it, they'll do their best to jump over it.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
I wish every school board in this country had a you at the helm. It's so comforting to hear your frame and hear your thinking and your clarity that what you want for your 3 daughters is what you want for every one of the kids in your district.
Absolutely.
And my BS meter is not going off. You'll be happy to know. It's just so authentic. Like, it's so grounded in you.
Thank you for saying that. I just appreciate, the kind comments. But I would say that it's not me. God has given me the ability and the grace to be able to operate in this space. And I recognize on any given day, I could be a hot mess, and we all can, right? We all have the ability to do that. And so I just recognize that's there. So I really appreciate you saying that.
When you knew you were coming on the podcast, was there anything you wanted to make sure we talked about that we haven't hit on yet?
No, I mean, I was open, and I remember asking if there were questions that I needed to prepare to answer, and I wasn't sure kind of, where we would take the conversation. But then Katie said, no, Michelle's going to ask you questions and just flow with it. I'm like, okay, I'll just try to be as open as possible and answer questions, as they come.
Thank you. Well, you were amazing. I can't wait to re-listen, but even not re-listening, I already have some very concrete things that have readjusted my lens in a way that I needed readjustment. I do want you to speak to one thing, if you don't mind. Remind me the FEAR acronym you shared.
False evidence appearing real.
False evidence appearing real. I think that's so useful right now with so many people kind of very understandably getting hooked by fear.
Yeah.
What works for you when you start getting hooked by fear?
Prayer. Prayer. I remember my mom had a stroke in 2023, and we were able to move her here to Dallas. She's in a facility here. Might be sharing too much, but this I think is relevant to what you just asked me. I remember we were encountering situations where, like back to back, it just seemed like we couldn't catch a break. It was one thing or another. Like it was just kind of mounting. And I remember thinking one day, I'm like, golly, Lord, like, we're having all these L's, we're getting these losses, like we're losing. And I happened to go to church. Not happened, I was going to church on Sunday. And this particular Sunday, our assistant pastor was delivering a message, and he talked about how Jesus paid it all, right? He paid the ultimate cost with his life on the cross, the finished work of Jesus Christ. He took all of our sins, and we don't have to succumb to those things anymore. And I was driving one day, and there was this song called Above All. I think Michael Smith was one of the individuals that had recorded it. It's a slower version, but the one that our worship team sings is typically a more upbeat. And this young lady by the name of Megan Williams, she's sang the song, and it was Above All. It's like he took the fall and he thought of me above all. And when I sort of reflected on that, and I was thinking about that within the context of what I was perceiving as losses, I was like, well, at the end of the day, because Jesus did what he did, and he died and he rose for us, we've already won. So at this point, I'm not losing anything. We're not losing anything. So I'm either winning or I'm learning. And so that was it allowed me to reframe that. And so when things happen and you tend to get fearful, yes, there are things that are happening, and it's very real, and you're going to have an emotion from that because you're a human, right? There's nobody that can tell you that you can't or shouldn't feel the way you feel. You feel how you feel. But then what do you do after that? Do you allow that feeling or that emotion to paralyze you, cause you to just sit there and not act or respond? Or do you embrace the emotion and respond and think and act anyway? And I think that a lot of times, if you can get through and buffer that emotion long enough and question, why do you feel the way you feel? It gives you enough of a buffer to be able to deal beyond that. And that was another thing that was really interesting for me. Because we are human beings and we're going to feel how we feel, a lot of times we judge ourselves for how we feel about whatever's happening. And you can kind of take that and it takes you down a path. But if you can question why you feel that way and kind of make it more of an exercise where you're examining, what is it about that thing that has me feeling this way? It allows you to take a step back and not physically be in it or not emotionally be in it, because you're sort of distancing yourself and you're kind of looking at it like, why do I feel that way? Or why did I feel that way about what he or she said? Or why did I feel this way about what he or she did? And it gives you that little buffer that's long enough for you to be able to respond, even in the moment, right? Giving yourself the permission to breathe and experience and feel, and then being able to deal going forward.
It's like a master class, what you just said, like regardless of your personal beliefs, connecting to something larger than yourself. I mean, in your case, it's God, Jesus, but whatever it is for people to connect to something bigger that gives that moment of fear a context. And then your advice to like sit with that feeling instead of like try to deny it or ignore it or false positivity, right. Just like get gently curious with it. I was a family therapist for years, and I used to ask people to like just start observing and not judging. Like just the phrase I would ask people to hold is, that's interesting. Just almost like that third dispassionate observer of like, that's interesting that triggered me, or that I feel fearful or sad or overwhelmed. And like you said, what might that be about? And then it gives you the opportunity to breathe, reset your nervous system a little. So good.
Yeah. Now I'll be the first to admit that it doesn't always happen that way, but that's the goal, right? We're pushing towards mastery, right?
People don't know, before we hit record today, we were talking about fetal position. So it definitely doesn't always work, but it works. It works like there is science to it. It's not something we have to reinvent. There's some real concrete things we know about the nervous system and when we're hijacked by a survival state and what helps us get to know our own personal nervous system enough to know what pulls us out.
Absolutely. And I think, you can build capacity to do that. And you just have to be intentional. It might not happen overnight, but if you keep practicing it, when things come up, you'll surprise yourself one day and you'll recognize that, I didn't respond the way that I used to respond. And you'll see that growth and it'll encourage you to continue that practice.
I love that. Like reps in the gym.
Reps in the gym. You got to build the muscle. Absolutely.
You have been so amazing to get to visit with. And I know it's going to really touch people to hear your story and your thinking and to know that people like you are holding the containers around very important public education. So thank you for everything you do and especially for hanging out with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Hi, Chris. We're back. Ready to talk about what we learned from Robert.
Would you like to start or would you like for me to?
Yes, I can start. And I'm going to go a little out of order because there's something he talked about that I think encompasses so much of what we're trying to do in just navigating life and in supporting educators as they navigate life. He said, be clear about what you need to be okay. And I just thought, if everybody listening, if educators across the country fully understanding all of the stuff coming at them that is not just, that is not fair, that is not okay, understood that even in the face of that, it falls on each of us to get clear about what we need to be okay and then really audit how are we doing with those things. It could change everything. At least in terms of people's individual well-being, certainly not the systemic stuff. That's another story. But I thought that was a really clear call to action he gave us.
I'm glad you pulled that out because I missed that actually. So I'm glad you brought that up.
What about you? What's on your list?
One of my very favorite things was actually his response to your comment when you made the point that kind of in passing that this work may not be completed in our lifetime. He was not going to let you go there. Yes. And I loved that. He was not conceding the fight. And he said, his response to problems not being solved in our lifetime was a lot can be solved when you get the right people with the right perspectives and experiences in the room. And I just felt like that was a very bold response and hopeful. Bold and hopeful.
I loved it too. It made me go, I need to retire that from my vocabulary. Like it really caught my attention how limiting that belief is.
But I liked what you responded with, and I don't know if it was immediate, but I wrote down, I think you said a mentor said it to you, to have an audacious sense of what's possible and what you want to see happen because it ignites enthusiasm. And if you water it down, you water down the engine that moves you toward what you want to see happen. So it's almost like keep that as your North Star, as you always say, instead of just, okay, it might not get done in our lifetime. Well, let's be audacious. Maybe it will.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That was when we were talking about David Emerald's work, who wrote TED, which is the empowerment dynamic, and 3 vital questions. Since we recorded that interview with Robert, and now, very sadly, he died suddenly.
Oh, wow.
And that entire community, me included, are reeling over it because he's just, his work and he as a person, such a beacon of light. And if people are curious about it, the book I would kind of be inclined to lead people to is the 3 vital questions, Transforming Workplace Drama. And If it's okay, I'll break down just a couple things.
Sure.
I think it's very relevant to Robert's message. The first question is, where are you putting your focus, on problems or outcomes? And that's kind of like that, are you driven by this vision of what you want to see happen, or are you swallowed up by the problem that's just making you anxious and reactive? And then the second is, how are you relating? And there's a lot of depth under that one, but basically, are you relating as a victim, rescuer, or persecutor, or are you relating as a creator, coach, or challenger? So that tons of detail there. But then the third is, what actions are you taking? And what he describes is this dynamic tension, excuse me, between what we want to see happen and what's actually happening in the world, or in our schools, or in our families, or whatever. That tension is what fuels the creative process. And so if we get, like you said, audacious about what we want to see happen, and we tell ourselves the truthiest truth about what's actually happening, then it's as if you had a rubber band that you were stretching between those 2 points. And anytime you care about what you want to see happen, and you're telling yourself the truth about the gap, it's uncomfortable. There's a tension there. And in the face of that tension, we have some choices. Like, we can water down the dream, because that would release the rubber band, right? But then it also releases the engine, so not recommended. Or we can fail to tell ourselves the truth about our current circumstances. That releases the tension. It's like, oh, it's fine. But it doesn't give us clarity about next steps, because if you aren't telling yourself the truth about where you are, whatever plan you have is going to be slightly off. And then the third is to hold that dynamic tension, know that it's a sign that you care about what you want to bring into the world, or what you want to create, and then let that tension illuminate the next steps. And that also releases the tension, but in a way that moves you toward what you want to see happen in your school, in your classroom, in the world, in your family, whatever. Which I find that concept so brilliant, and David Emerald in general, just so brilliant and so full-hearted. And I know that his partner Donna Zhejiang is going to continue his work in the world, but man, what a loss.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, forgive me, because it's a little bit like long-winded, but hopefully
relevant.
Yeah,
Timely, relevant.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the bell curve?
Yes.
I loved that concept.
It was so good.
It was so good. Sickness, like thinking about just sickness, wellness, and fitness, and then comparing that to mastery.
Yes.
It made me think a lot about, especially if you're thinking about it from self-care and the health side, it made me think about what we learned from John Gasco about anticipate adversity and be prepared to be a counterforce. So that's the purpose of, being all the way on that side. Just when life pulls you back, you're ready. You're ready to be that counterforce. I loved that.
That is such a sticky concept. And it was so cool how he came to it. And then to know that he's leading a board of a large school district thinking like that, combined with his concept of, would that be okay if it was your kid that was in the 30% or whatever, that then slid into like there's so much electricity around that. And also, like, I know there are people listening who are desperately aiming to be in the wellness or the sort of like meets expectations in the classroom. They're like working so hard to get there, but the energetic transformation of, instead of aiming for the top of the bell curve, aiming for the full other side of it, so that when life happens, you never slide all the way back into either illness or failing to meet expectations in the case of the kids. Like, that's a game changer.
I loved it.
When you heard it, what sparked, where did you go in your head? Did you think about like...
I went back to that principle of anticipate adversity because it's coming, and being a counterforce. It just made it, with the added visual of the bell curve, it made all of that more real. And then it made and I hope educators hear this and take it to heart like I did, it made the do what's obvious even more urgent, right? Rest and nourish and hydrate and move, like simple things, but it made it more urgent so that you are over towards mastery.
Yes. That like, don't waste any energy being surprised when life comes for us.
Right.
Because it's coming.
And you're going to slide backwards. So where do you want your starting point to be?
Yeah.
Because there will be, I mean, even if you're the strongest counterforce possible, there'll be some, you're going to absorb some energy from that adversity and take a few steps back. So how far back do you want to go? Where do you want that to be? That was really inspiring to me.
Yeah, very, very sticky. And, we know our listeners are understandably some of the most stressed out people on the planet. Like, it's insane what they have navigated and what they are navigating. So none of this like is meant to sound like, oh, just do this. It's no big deal. It's like honoring how stressed their lives can be, and what are some ways you can, as he talked about it, like what was his language? Oh, I really want to use his exact language. Where do I have that? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, I can't find it. Fortifying our system in the face of whatever is happening that maybe isn't in the best interest of kids outside of our control. He talked about fortifying their district in the face of whatever's happening at the national and state level. But that's also true for each individual educator. Like, that's that bell curve. Like, how do you fortify your system so that you can navigate the expected and off the chart stress that educators are metabolizing these days?
Fortify your personal system is what you mean, right?
Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. Both. Yeah. Like, participate in fortifying your system, if that's your school, your family, your district, but also like, it really does go right back to that individual. Like, and what was the first sentence that I couldn't let go of? Be clear about what you need to be okay. No one's going to do that for you. Like, that really is individual work.
This is the year your girl discovers what she loves. She'll make lifelong friends, smile till her cheeks ache, and explore amazing places. She'll try new things, climb higher, and lend a helping hand. She'll change her world, adventuring in ways you never imagined. She'll grow in confidence, turn dreams into reality, and find her voice. And through it all, she'll have big fun. Give your girl the opportunity to grow with Girl Scouts. Visit girlscouts.org/join today.
Did you think, in his bio, he talked about relationships are the real engine of transformation in our schools and communities, which I agree. And I loved his vision of principals being there to provide resources and tools for educators to help them do their job, and that being the way that you you signed up to do this, so that is your job. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that is truly how principals see their job? And do educators feel comfortable going to a principal who is their boss, saying what they need? You know, it's because that's a hard thing to do. And I loved that in theory, and I just wondered what educators felt. I mean, that's amazing if the educators in Garland ISD feel that way, because they've created that type of system. And it would be utopian if it was that way everywhere. But that just stood out to me. I wondered what you thought.
Yeah, I loved that, going back to the relationship and sort of that culture of one concept, that it's not like, hey, let's do this and it's going to serve everyone in terms of their well-being or nervous system. It's like, can I, as a leader, be in deep relationship with each person that is in my system, so that we can look at meeting their needs, not as a parent or therapist or partner. That's not it. It's like, what do you need in order to do your job? And that line sometimes gets fuzzy, and it makes leaders go, I'm not their therapist. And I get it. You're not. So that's not what we're talking about. The role is, what do the people who you work with need to do the job? And sometimes you go down that road and what they need is not doable. And so then maybe that's not the role for them, and you help them exit, or they exit themselves. But very often you can do what they need, and that allows them to deliver on the expectations. I think your question is a good one. I think it just depends leader to leader. Like a lot of leaders out there still think the people who report to me exist to support me executing my work, my vision, my work. The way he's talking about it and the way I think works, it's flipped. It's like, every leader needs to be thinking about themselves on the bottom of the work chart. What do I do to make sure the people that report to me can do their jobs effectively? What do they do? And then the people at the top of the org chart should be closest to the action. In this case, people working with students.
I like that. I love that.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm sure there are people who are like, there's no space in my relationship with my principal to be vulnerable. And they might be right. And then,
And then there are people like Tom Brandt.
Yeah.
Right? And that type of principal who values well-being and Robert and relationships.
If anyone listens to all the episodes, hey, Ricardo, hey, Tom just got recruited to go lead a school district. So he is big loss for Dallas, but an incredible gain for where he's headed, which I think is in Washington State. So
Love that.
It's exciting to think about his reach being even more extensive. What else showed up on your list of takeaways?
I liked the discussion, I think it was towards the end, about taking it. These are not his words, but my interpretation of his words, taking a moment to sit with your emotion instead of reacting, but thinking about doing that like a rep in the gym, right? Like you're working that muscle every time you do that, which again is why we have Tacky Box, and we're teaching kids to do that through that tool. But I love just the thought of that. Like, you're not perfect. And he said that many times, like he's human. He's not perfect. I loved that. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to slip up. But every time we do it, we're working a muscle and we're getting better. We're getting stronger. And in my mind now, I was back to the bell curve. We're moving more towards mastery.
Yeah, in that part of the conversation, one of the phrases he used was, you can build capacity.
Yes.
Which again, it's so hopeful. It's like, okay, this is where we are. Where are we headed? What do I do today to move an inch closer? And when I move an inch away, how do I frame that in a compassionate way like he does? All right, we're humans now. That moved me away. How do I move back? So powerful. One of the things that I loved was his false evidence appearing real.
Oh, I knew that was going to pop up. Yes. Yes.
That feels just so. There was something about how he carried himself that made me keep asking him about how he's relating to the fear right now, because he's so grounded and like just there's something about how he like embodies leadership that made me think you're doing something about this that is not swallowing you up. So I loved hearing him talk about that false evidence appearing real, and how for him it's prayer, but just how he puts things in a larger context so that it doesn't feel like, he's in a spin.
The look on his face and just how quickly the word prayer came out when you asked that question was very inspiring to me. Like, talk about knowing yourself and knowing what you need. He knows.
Be clear about
he's
what
very
you need
clear.
to be okay.
Yeah, he's very clear.
Yeah.
I loved
totally
that.
agree.
I also loved when his framework of I'm either winning or learning.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
That's a phrase to hold on to.
And especially how he talked about how he came to it. That, he was feeling pretty beat up by life, and his narrative was, what did he used that very sportsy term, the L's. He kept racking up the L's. And then he just completely reframed it into that I'm either winning or learning. Yeah.
And
powerful.
The word failing isn't in that, right? Like, it's just, it's a lovely way to embrace the adversity of life.
And be a counterforce.
Right? I love that.
It's all weaving together.
It's going to be written on my mirrors.
Can you even see yourself in the mirror still? Or is it just like a beautiful mind?
Don't tell
remember
anybody.
that movie?
Oh, wait. We just said it on a podcast.
It's out there now.
Ricardo
Anything
knows.
else? Yeah, Ricardo knows.
I appreciated his response when you asked what the message to educators would be, and he immediately said self-care. Immediately. And then he immediately listed all the same things that Dr. Gasco listed from Do the Obvious, the same 4 things: rest, move, hydrate, nourish. We would be remiss not to mention Jacqueline Stevens and her impact on him. I loved that. And talked about joy, infectious joy, and that being a key to the educator relationship with kids.
I loved that he called his high school English teacher, Miss Stevens, or Stevenson. I missed
Stevens.
Right. Miss Stevens called her as he was stepping onto the school board. It made me think about, like, who should I be calling? Like, who needs to hear from me that they put me on a path? Like, that's just so beautiful that he had that instinct. I can only imagine what her version of that call would be, but I guarantee she could tell it. Like, that had to be so meaningful to her to get that call.
I love that.
And that she's still teaching. We have heard about some major heroes that are still in the game and have been there for decades over these last few podcasts.
Do you know what I thought of when he shared that story? I thought of she was my high school English and French. I think I took French 1, 2, and 3 from her. Minnie Lawton, and she is still in my hometown. But I will never forget this day because I grew up in a very, small town, country town, and someone used the phrase, and apologies in advance for saying it, but someone used the phrase, like talking in class, I'm going to Jew you down, like talking about negotiating. And she stopped our class, like stopped the class and said, do you know what that phrase means? And the majority of the people didn't. And she loaded us all on a bus and took us to the Holocaust Museum in Dallas for a field trip, and like had us stand in that cattle car, and gave us like this real visceral experience to teach us about that. And if you think about like who I became, I had never really connected those two dots until I was listening to him.
Wow. Miss Lawton.
Miss Lawton.
Oh, are you going to send her this?
I should find out how.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should find out how.
What a powerful, clear woman back then to do that, to show up in that way, both with grace of like, these are kids, they're saying things that they don't understand the gravity of, but not letting it go. And then to take it even further and be like, I'm going to round out their worldview in a way that they understand the gravity of this. Like that, wow.
It's pretty amazing.
It's really amazing.
It really is. I can still remember standing in that cattle car and like what she said and how it felt. It was remarkable. Really remarkable.
I'd love for her to also hear Alex Vesely's interview. If people are just tuning in, that's Viktor Frankl's grandson. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay. One little like snarky remark, not about Robert, but about the state of our country. Like, I forget who he attributed as saying that there's a special place in heaven for teachers. And I do think for sure, like they are serving in a way that like, it's something that extends beyond this world. But also in me was this sense of like, is that an exit ramp that we use of like, oh, well, people who are in service-oriented work, you'll get yours. Instead of like, what if we, to his point of not allowing things to be like, oh, can't solve that in our lifetime. Like, what if we held ourselves accountable to creating heaven on earth for teachers to do their work? Like, I would be just gobsmacked to live in a world where people doing the most important work had the most resources, the most freedom, the most space to thrive, instead of our current model where it's like, we're not going to raise the per student allotment in Texas since 2019, but we're going to change all of these requirements, and hey, good luck.
But there's the audacious goal. So
yes,
keep looking at that, right? There's the
Yes.
audacious goal.
Yes. And he says, hey, get the right people at the table, right perspectives. It could be solved in our lifetime. And there may just be enough chaos happening right now that some windows and doors to a new reality open that are even more, that give even more space for the audacious dreams than in more stable times. Who knows? I guess it depends what we do with it.
Because it's so needed right now. So needed. I mean, the impact that educators can have if we empower them and resource them, that's everything right now. We could close with, my BS meter did go off at one point during this interview. Would you like to know when?
Oh God, do I? I doubt it, but go ahead.
When he said that every day he realizes he could be a hot mess, I don't think there's any way that man could be a hot mess one day of his life.
That is the perfect way to close. Yes, I agree. His hot mess has to look like our best day. Yeah, not fair.
He's
funny.
at mastery. He's at mastery.
He's at mastery, and he works so hard at it with such a generosity of spirit for the rest of us. So glad he's in the world. So glad you and Katie found him and invited him to join us. Like, what a wealth of expertise that came out of his mouth, but I was even more impacted by what came out of his being, just like so inspired by him.
It was awesome. Great interview. Thanks for sharing.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody next week. Please rate and review and share with friends. Like, it really, really helps us. And a huge thanks, as always, to our producer, Katie Warden, who helps make the world go round. And we'll see everybody next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow. And if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.